Semester Aboard, Book 1 in the More Than Magic series, by Elizabeth Kirke. Narrated by Hawkeward. Chapter 1. A taxicab raced down the dock, came to a stop, and a girl laden with shopping bags flew out. Everyone at the rails of the ship yelled as she rushed toward the gangway. She was a runner, one of the students who had pushed the all-aboard time to the limit. She vanished into the ship to a mix of boos and cheers. "She's going to be cleaning tables tomorrow," my roommate Laurie snickered. Most of us had taken the all-aboard time and subsequent punishments for being late seriously, and had been on the ship for over an hour. The majority of the people watching the runners had changed into pajama bottoms or sweatshirts with "Semester Aboard, Study Abroad" written on them. We were students on a cruise ship that had been turned into a floating campus. Instead of studying abroad for a summer in one country, we were traveling down the western coast of Latin America. Our ship had classrooms, a dining hall, dorm rooms, even a workout room and a pool.
"Look, there's another,"
called Danny. He pointed to another cab speeding down the dock. Even though it had been 10 days since our voyage started, I still didn't know half of the 307 students. I had just met Danny earlier today. We ended up next to each other on a bus that took us on a tour of Acapulco. Every country had a bunch of trips to choose from, and you never knew who else on the ship would end up with you. It turned out that Danny and I were just 4 rooms apart and had never seen each other before today. I wasn't entirely sure how I'd missed him. He was really tall, with short hair and tan olive skin. His hair had looked black on the bus, but once I saw it in the sun, I was pretty sure that he dyed it midnight blue. And he was drop-dead gorgeous, with a personality to match. He was incredibly friendly and outgoing. We spent the entire bus ride chatting, and when I mentioned that I didn't recognize anybody else on the bus, he offered to stick around so I'd have somebody to talk to. We ended up spending the entire tour together.
"Danny!"
someone called. We both turned to see a boy winding his way between people and tables towards us. He had wavy red hair and looked like he'd gotten sunburned in Mexico. I was pretty sure he could pull off the natural redhead look, but I could see streaks where the red dye, which was a bit too bright to be natural, had faded to orange and blonde. It gave his head an almost flaming appearance, which I had a feeling applied to more than just his hair. He was in one of my classes, and I racked my brain for his name. He didn't sit next to me, but we talked a bit before our class had started.
"Hey, Charlie,"
Danny said.
"how is the city?"
he asked, joining us at the rail. I noticed that he wasn't much taller than me. He was sort of stocky, but not overweight.
"It was fun."
Danny gestured to me.
"Jen here was with me." "See anything good?" "The fort was pretty splashy,"
Danny said.
"How was your mountain biking?" "Toasty. I saw like a dozen chupacabras." "No, you didn't."
Danny laughed.
"Yes, I did."
I laughed and turned my attention back to the runners while they argued. The last of the late students climbed aboard, and dock workers started undoing the mooring lines. By now, just about everyone, including faculty, had gathered on the deck. Mexico was our first port, and we'd been inside for orientation the first time the ship left a dock. We cheered as the ship started to pull away. "Adios, Mexico!" someone yelled.
"Vaya con Dios!"
We waved at the scattered people on deck, until we were too far away to see them in the dark. The wind started to pick up as the ship cruised along past the lights of the buildings on the edges of the bay. People gradually started to disperse. "Class in the morning," Laurie reminded me with a groan. Ugh. We had classes every day we were at sea, and the first one started bright and early at 8. We wove our way through the crowd, back inside the ship, and joined the scattered people going down to their rooms. After we reached the 4th deck, we turned off the stairway and into a brightly lit, long corridor that spanned the entire length of the ship. Doors to our cabins lined both sides of it. Long railings ran along the walls, but so far I hadn't needed to use them. As Laurie and I walked down the hall, I spotted two familiar faces. Charlie was leaning against the outside wall, laughing, while Danny swiped his ID card over and over on a door.
"Would you stop laughing?"
Danny grumbled.
"I told you not to put it in the same pocket as your phone," Charlie said.
"Are you locked out again?" cried a voice behind me. I turned to see a girl striding down the hall towards us. I'd seen her around the ship before. She looked like a supermodel. She was tall, with thick, wavy blonde hair that looked like it had green streaks in it. She had a figure that women paid thousands for, and eyes so blue they probably made mine look grey. I noticed that she wore a t-shirt that said Marlin's Swim Team, which explained her green hair. She was probably a great swimmer. She definitely had the body for it.
"How else am I going to carry it? It's not like I have a purse,"
Danny said. "Get your ID punched and put it on that lanyard they gave us," the blonde sighed. She shoved Danny out of the way, swiped her ID, and opened the door. Halfway in, she turned back to Danny with a condescending look. "If you get locked out one more time, I'm not letting you back in." Danny had to lunge forward to catch the door as it closed. Charlie laughed and followed them in. Wait, the blonde girl and Danny were roommates. With the exception of some of the professors and staff who had brought their families, all of the rooms on the ship were single-sex. I knew for a fact Danny was a student. "Are they roommates?" I asked Laurie. "Yeah, that's Mariana and Danny. They're married." "What? Seriously?" It actually wasn't that hard to believe. Danny was probably the hottest guy on the ship, and Mariana could easily be the most beautiful girl. If anyone on the ship would be married to one of them, it would clearly be the other. Laurie nodded. "I heard Mariana telling somebody that this is like their honeymoon or something. She said they had to fax their marriage certificate the second they got it so they would be allowed to share a room." Wow. It sounded pretty cool, but I wasn't sure I'd want to take classes on my honeymoon. We continued down the hall to our room. Even though I had only slept there for a few nights before we arrived in Mexico, it already felt like home, and it was nice to be back. It wasn't a very big room, but it was cozy. A narrow alcove separated our room from the door. Just by standing in one spot and turning, I could close our door, open the bathroom door, open the closet, and reach my hand into the bedroom. Our beds were so close together that our nightstands were sandwiched between them, without enough room for even a pencil to roll off. I could have reached out and touched Laurie's bed from mine. We each had a chair and a little desk at the foot of our beds. Aside from some drawers built into the wall and a small TV, there was nothing else in our room. After brushing my teeth, I climbed happily into bed. It didn't take long for the motion of the ship and hum of the engines to lull me to sleep. All too soon, my alarm rang for my morning class. By the time I got out of the shower, Laurie had returned from her daily trip up to the gym. I stepped out of the bathroom and was dressed before I heard the shower turn on. I smiled at how easily we got back into routine after 5 days in port. I went up to breakfast and chose a random table. A couple of girls I hadn't met yet, and a professor and her 2 little boys sat there. We exchanged introductions and ate. I found Laurie after breakfast, and we made our way to the huge room that served as the Latin American history classroom. It was the first class of the day and was mandatory for everyone, even the faculty. Across the room, I spotted Charlie's bright hair and noticed that he was sitting with Danny and Mariana. After class, I joined the shuffle of students heading to other classrooms. My next class, Plant Use in Latin American Culture, was the one that Charlie was in too. "Hey, Jen," Carrie greeted me as we entered the room. "The import project isn't due today, right?"
"No, it's due tomorrow,"
Charlie answered. He was sitting at the desk closest to the door. "What a relief," Carrie said. "I did that algae the Aztecs grew. What about you guys?" "I wrote mine on tomatoes," I said.
"Chilies,"
Charlie said. Ugh! Carrie wrinkled her nose. I can't stand spicy stuff.
You won't like me then,
Charlie said and winked at her. We laughed and took our seats across the room. He's cute, but he sets off my gaydar like, whoa, she whispered to me. Mine too, I giggled. After class ended, I had half an hour to kill. I swung by the dining room on deck 5 and grabbed a quick lunch. Like my plant use class, my next class was uneventful. When it was over, I passed Danny in the hall on the way to Spanish for Travellers.
Hola,
Danny called as he passed me.
doing all right?
I'm bueno, I giggled to him. He laughed and headed for the stairs. After Spanish, I joined the throng of people gathered on deck 7. I found a lounge chair and pulled it over to the rails so I could watch the water while I studied. The next day was pretty much the same, but it started raining early in the afternoon and turned into a bad storm by the time I went to bed. I woke up in the middle of the night and stumbled over to our bathroom feeling awful. A bit of quality time bent over the toilet didn't help at all, and I decided to try some fresh air. I pulled a sweater on over my pajamas, hung my ID card strap around my neck, and slipped out of the room. I made my way down the corridor to the door that led outside. For the first time since getting on the ship, I had to keep one hand on the railing. The halls were well lit, even though it was the middle of the night, and it was almost disconcerting to step outside into the darkness. But the moment cool, damp wind hit my face, I felt better. I hadn't been seasick since our first night, but sometimes I felt nauseous if I stayed in our room too long. Being out on the deck always helped. I had assumed that I'd be the only one crazy enough to go out in the rain in the middle of the night, but to my surprise, I wasn't. There were people on the other side of the deck. It was too dark to see them well, but the lights from the deck above us illuminated them a little. One of them was Charlie. He was standing under the overhang where deck 5 extended out above deck 4. He was just wearing a t-shirt and jeans, and I shivered in sympathy. A guy I recognized, not surprising since we all lived on a ship, was sitting on the bottom steps of the outdoor stairway that led to deck 5. He was probably a football player back home or something. He had shaggy, dark brown hair and a fairly large nose. I'd heard a few girls giggling about him, but I didn't think he was that good-looking. I wasn't sure what his name was. Another guy sat in a chair, probably pilfered from deck 5, with his back to me and his feet up on the rails. Mariana was near him, wearing only a bikini top and a short skirt. I couldn't believe she wasn't cold. I didn't scream, she said.
You totally did. You freaked out, Danny laughed.
It had been too dark to notice Danny until he spoke. My jaw dropped in shock. Danny was sitting on the railing of the ship. Messing around on the rails was one of the first things they told us not to do when we got on board. Even sitting on them in the middle of a calm day was suicidal at best. But to sit there in the middle of a stormy night was nothing short of a death wish. I was not, Mariana cried.
You were all like, "Oh, Daniel, save me, Daniel."
Well, don't be such a jerk. As Mariana spoke, she spun to face Danny and shoved him hard. Danny's laugh turned into a yell of surprise, and he tumbled backward off of the railing.